Welcome to Excel Basics number 4. This is our Introduction to Excel video project number 4. And in this video, we're going to see how to create summary reports with the amazing pivot table feature and the sum ifs functions. Now, this is part of our Office 2016 series, and this is video number 16. Here are all of the topics we're going to cover. And the goal in this video is simply to create summary reports and see how to do it with a pivot table and the sum ifs functions. That's what it will look like for our sum ifs, and that's the finished report when we do it with a pivot table. Now, I want to go to our website, people.highline.edu/mgirvin. Here's our class, 216. Here's Excel. Here's all the video links and files. These files are also available directly below the YouTube video. But I want to click on the PDF. And if you're not downloading these PDFs and printing them out and keeping them, you're not going to get the free book, because all of these handouts together are an amazing free book about Excel. I'm going to click on this link, and it will open in our browser. And I want to scroll down here and just remind ourselves of what Excel can do. Broadly speaking, Excel can make calculations and perform data analysis. Now, the calculations we've already done in this class, in video project 1, we saw how to create a formula like this to calculate percentage grade. We did a formula like this in video number 2 to calculate net income. And here we use the average function in video number 1 to calculate the average. Those are examples of calculations we can make in Excel. Now, we haven't seen how to do data analysis yet, so this will be our first example of data analysis. And that simple few words right there describes exactly what data analysis is. We're simply converting raw data into useful information. So in this video, we'll have this data set. This is our raw data. Lots of little bits of data, dates, regions, sales reps, sales, with lots of different sales transactions we've had. We need to convert this raw data into some useful information. Our useful information is going to be a regional sales report. You can see each one of the regions and then the total sales for each one of those regions. This is how we're going to do it with the sum ifs function, and here's how we'll do it with the pivot table. Now, again, these notes are pretty awesome. You should be downloading them and reading them along with watching the video. Now, I've already downloaded the Excel file, and so I want to go over to the sheet sum ifs or pivot table. Now, there's our data set, and here's a little start to our regional report for our sum ifs, and then we'll create our pivot table down here. But before we do that, we want to go over to the sheet data analysis and just remind ourselves. You hear the word data analysis, or sometimes the current phrase you hear is business intelligence. Both of those phrases simply mean go from the raw data into some useful information. Now, the useful information, as we'll see in this video and next video, could be all sorts of different things from this one single data source. In this video, again, we're creating a regional sales report. Now, we have to go over to the sheet proper data set, because when you're dealing with raw data, you got to make sure that the raw data is in a proper data set. Here's the 3 things that define a proper data set in Excel. And there's a visual here. In the first row, you have what are called column headers, or the proper name is field names. Date, region, sales rep, sales, all in the first row. Now, notice, why do we have to have field names or column headers? Because you have to have a name at the top that tells the user what to put in this column. Only region goes in this column. Only date goes in this column. And, of course, sales rep and sales. Field names, always in the first row. And then we have something called a record. For us, it is a transaction. We have one sale here made on 10/20/17. in the Northwest region. Sales rep who made the sale was Gigi, and the amount of the sale was $484. So these are called records or transactions. Later in the class, we'll see other records, like a record with all the employee information. But for us, this first example, this is simply a record of one sale. The final thing that has to be true about a proper data set is that you have to have completely empty cells all the way around the data set. You cannot accidentally type a note here like this, and then whatever you have. It is touching the data set, so it violates our rule for what a proper data set is. So I'm going to click Escape. Now, we have empty cells on the right and below. But wait a second, there's no empty cells over here? Yeah, no problem. You can have the actual Excel row headers or column headers touching the data set, but no data in the actual cells. 1, 2, 3. Field names in first row, records in the rest of the rows, empty cells all the way around. All right, now we're going to go over to the sheet Sum Ifs or Pivot Tables. There's our proper data set. Now we're going to create 1, 2, 3 different reports here. We're going to create a regional sales report, a daily sales report, and then a sales report for the sales reps. All right, so we're going to have our first example of creating a summary report using the Sum Ifs functions. The first thing we have to do is actually look through the region column and figure out what regions there are, how many different regions that we have. Now, this is a small data set, so we can simply look through and notice that we have West, Northwest, and Southwest. So if we're creating a summary report with the Sum Ifs functions, we're actually going to have to type out the 3 different regions. So I'm simply going to type, and I better type them exactly the same as they appear in this proper data set. And remember, no spaces. We saw in the last video, if you mistype Excel formulas, and for us, the Sum Ifs will not work correctly. So I type Northwest, enter, Southwest, enter, and then West, enter. Now, I already created the titles at the top of each one of our columns, region and total. Now I'm going to click here, F2, to put it in edit mode. I'm going to type a space and say total sales, enter.
Total sales.
Now we can create our total formula using the Sum Ifs functions. Sum Ifs, just like we saw last video. Now the difference between how we're going to use Sum Ifs this video and last video is last video we never copied the formula anywhere. Here, I want to be able to copy it down and have each one of the rows calculate the correct region total. So sum range, that's the column with all the sales. So I highlight all the sales. I come over and I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock that, because as I copy this formula down, I do not want that blue range to move as I copy. Now remember, with Sum Ifs, it's not going to add everything. It's only going to add if for this row the region is Northwest. For the next row, the region is Southwest. The final row, region will be equal to West. So we have our sum range and we locked it. Now we type a comma to get to the next argument. Criteria range. Well, remember, we need to pick out all the Northwest regions. So absolutely, in criteria range, we need to give it the entire range, or in our case, it's a column with all the possible regions. I also need to lock this, so I'm going to hit the F4 key. So as I copy that formula down, that orange range doesn't move. Now, comma to get to criteria 1. And I simply click on the region. That is a relative cell reference, and that formula will do the trick. Close parentheses. Control Enter, because I want to put the formula in the cell and immediately do something to it. Now I want to add some number formatting before I copy it down. So I'm going to use Control-1 to open up Format Cells. I want to choose currency. I would like to change the decimals to 0 because we don't have any pennies in our data set. The symbol is $sign. I like that minus as my negative. I click OK or hit Enter. Now I'm going to copy this down. I point to my fill handle, and when I see my angry rabbit, I click and drag. Anytime we copy a formula, we go to the last cell and hit F2. That is absolutely beautiful. The blue range and orange range are absolutely locked, and the lavender purple range is totally looking at west. Now, if we think about how we might mistakenly do it some other way, someone might, in a cell, manually eye it and then click on the cell for the west, and then this cell for the west, and this cell for the west, adding them all together. That would take much too long. Another mistaken way to do this is if you sorted the columns and then added a sum at each change in the region. The problem with that method, of course, is yes, it takes longer than this. And if you ever sorted it by one of the other columns, the totals would be totally wrong. So the sum ifs functions to create a summary report like this is quite an amazing and easy formula. I'm going to hit Enter. Now I want to do the sum ifs for 2 more reports, and then we'll look at our pivot table option. Now I already typed out the dates here and the sales rep name. So I simply come to the top cell, equals sum ifs. The sum range, those are all the numbers I potentially want to add. So I highlight the entire sales column. Remember, you're in full edit mode as long as the dancing ants are moving. When I get the correct range, I have to come over and F4 to lock that. So as I copy the formula down, the range does not move. Comma. Criteria range 1. Well, this time it's not region. We're going to highlight the date column. Now I'm going to mistakenly forget to lock this because all of us are human and we will all do this at some point in creating summary reports. And we'll see how to fix it. Comma. Now the criteria. I simply need to give it the individual date. By giving it that individual date, I'm telling SUMIFS to only add the sales for that one day as a relative cell reference. Now I can close parentheses, Control-Enter, Control-1 to add some number formatting, currency. Same thing here. I want 0 decimal places. Click OK. And now I got to show you a great trick for copying formulas. Normally, we take our cursor, and when we see our angry rabbit on top of our fill handle, we click and drag. Now, I'm immediately going to Control-Z. A faster way to do it, as long as you have data to the left, you can simply double-click. I double-clicked with my angry rabbit, and instantly it copied it down. Now, it knew how to copy down because as soon as it saw an empty cell, it knew to stop. Always, when we copy a formula, we go to the last cell and hit F2. And sure enough, we're verifying using our color-coded range finder. And we can see that we forgot to lock it. See, if we don't lock it, it moves. We copied it down 5 cells, so the range moved 5 cells. Now, what we have to do to fix it is Escape, go back to the top cell, F2, and I need to lock it. Now, what you do not want to do is just click like that, because if you hit the F4 key, it'll do just A15. You also don't want to go like this and mistakenly highlight just part of it. The safest way to edit a range or edit an argument in a function is to click on the screen tip. So I click on criteria range 1, and when I click, it automatically will highlight everything. Then I can simply use the F4 key to lock it. Now, it looks like the formula is correct. I have sum range locked, criteria range 1 locked, and criteria as a relative cell reference. Now I Control Enter to put the formula in the cell and keep the cell selected because I immediately want to double click and copy it down. Now I go to the last cell and hit F2 to verify. And look at that. All of the ranges are working perfectly. All right, so we've created 2 summary reports, one for the region, one for the day. One more. We need a sales rep report. I'm going to click in cell O15 equals sum ifs. For the sum range, I'm going to highlight the entire sales column. F4 to lock it, comma. Criteria range. Remember, we're trying to add for each one of the sales reps in each one of the rows here. So for criteria range, I'm going to go highlight the sales rep column. I'm highlighting every single sales rep. When I get the correct range, I come up F4 to lock it, comma. Criteria 1, that is a relative cell reference. Close parentheses, Control Enter, Control 1, currency, no decimals, click OK. Now I can double click and send it down. Immediately go to the last cell and hit F2. You know, a lot of you are in this class getting a grade, and the tests come up, and there's some huge proportion of people on tests in this class that create a summary report like this, and they didn't lock the cell reference, and they lose a lot of points. Now, if you're not in a class, you're out working in your job, the problem is you'll create the wrong summary report with the wrong numbers. So always, just as an automatic reflex, when you copy the formula to any range, whether down, to the side, or in a rectangular range, go to the last cell and F2 to verify. All right, now what we did here is we created summary reports. If I click right in Southwest, F2, there's the sum ifs. What it did was sum ifs actually went through for every row in the region column. It asked, is the region for the first record equal to Southwest? False. So it didn't use that number. It went down to every single record. Only when it found Southwest did it say true, and then go and get the number and use it to add. So for Southwest, it only found a few of them. There's another one. There's another one, and another one down there. When escape, when we did the date, let's do this one right here, F2. Sum ifs went through and looked for 1023 in the date column. It did not find any 1023s, so it didn't add any of the numbers. It totally worked. Escape over here, F2, sum ifs. It knew it was trying to find chin, so it went exactly through this column, one row at a time. Only when it saw chin did it get the associated number. That June number right there is not used in that calculation right there. All right, so we saw sum ifs to create 3 summary reports. Now we want to see how to do the same 3 reports with a pivot table. Now, the very first thing we do when we create a pivot table from a proper data set is to click in a single cell in our data set. It doesn't matter which single cell, but select one cell. And now we go up to the Insert Ribbon tab, and in the Tables group, there's our Pivot Table button. I click, and this opens up the Create Pivot Table dialog box. Now, there's 2 parts, 1, 2. The first part is where is your range. It will always guess correctly if you have a proper data set with empty cells all the way around, and you've selected a single cell. So that means the only step we really need to worry about is step 2. Where do you want your pivot table? I'm going to put it on this sheet. So I click Existing Worksheet, click in Location. I'm going to drag the Create Pivot Table dialog box off to the side, and I'm going to try and click in F23. I see the destination cell for my pivot table. Now I can click OK. There's our blank pivot table. And over here, This is the pivot table fields task pane. And look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like we have over here, 1, 2, 3, 4. The field names in the first row will always show up in what is called our field list over here. And this is amazing because remember, we need to get a unique list of region and then add the sales for each region. But with a pivot table, as compared to SUMIFS, watch how easy this is. I'm going to check the region. And just like that, down in the rows area, I see the field region. And over here, I got a list of exactly one of each item. Now, this has a special name. This is called a unique list or a distinct list. Now, I want you to think about that. With a pivot table, all we did is check, and it went through this entire column and got exactly one of each item. Remember, up here with SUMIFS, we had to do it manually, and we risked mistyping an extra space or something like that. So that's pretty amazing. But it gets more amazing than that. This is our number field with our sales. So if I check it, it automatically goes down to the values area. The values area is the calculation area of our pivot table. And over in the pivot table report, instantly it calculated the total for each one of our regions. Now, the next step in creating our pivot table report is noticing that row labels is not a good label. We actually want it to say region there. Now, there's a default layout for a pivot table, and we want to change it. So we come up to our new pivot table tools, analyze or design ribbon tab. We're going to go to design, over to layout, and click the drop down for report layout. And we either want to show an outline or tabular. By default, it comes in compact, and that one doesn't show your field names. I'm going to select show in tabular. And just like that, we have the field name at the top and our gray lines. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add number formatting to the values area of our pivot table. Now, the way we add number formatting to the values area in a pivot table is different than how we would add it to cells in our spreadsheet. Cells in our spreadsheet, we would highlight all the cells and use Control-1 to open up Format Cells. Notice all the different tabs, but that's for cells. We're in a pivot table, so we have to do it in a different way. We don't highlight everything. We simply click in one cell anywhere in the values area, not in the rows area, but actually where our calculation is. Then, with one cell, right-click. Do not select Format Cells. If we do that, we see all of the tabs, and that's not what we want. When we're in a pivot table, we actually want to add number formatting to the field. So right-click, and there it is. Only in a pivot table will this option show up, number formatting. So for example, right-click, you can't find number formatting because that's not a pivot table. Ready? Right-click, number formatting. And there it is. You can tell for sure that you're in the format, the field, and the values area dialog box because there's only one tab, the number tab. Now I'm going to select currency. And we don't have any pennies, so I'm not going to show any pennies. That will make the report less cluttered. Dollar, negative sign is OK. Click OK. And just like that, we've added number formatting to the actual sum of sales. Now, our report is finished. And look at that. Just like the SUMIFS, that calculation right there, $3,117, that's the total amount for Southwest. Internally, the pivot table did exactly what the SUMIFS did, right? It looked through the region column, only picked out the records that had Southwest, and then only got the numbers associated with each Southwest sale. Then it added. So at its essence, what a pivot table does is it makes a calculation with some condition or criteria. And for this report and the other three we'll make in this video, we're only adding with a single condition. In our next video, we'll see how to use the pivot table to make calculations with more than one condition or criteria. All right, so that's our first report. Let's create our second report. I'm going to go over and click in any single cell up to Insert, Pivot Table. It always guesses right because we have a single cell selected in our proper data set. Existing, click in location, and I'm very carefully going to select cell J23. Click OK or hit Enter. There's our same field list. And because this is our second pivot table, it shows the same field list, but nothing is checked. Now, instead of checking, I'm going to show you how to drag fields to different areas in the bottom part of our pivot table fields task pane. Now, the reason that dragging is better than checking is next video when we start dragging multiple fields down to different areas, if you use the checkbox, it doesn't always get sent to the right part of the pivot table. So the dragging method will always get your field to the correct part of your report. Now, we don't want region like in our last one. We want to drag date. Now, I'm going to click and drag. You can see my move cursor. Click and drag. Notice the no symbol. Over here is no. But as soon as we get to one of these areas, we're allowed to drag it. You can see that green bar. You can also see the little icon. There's blue representing the rows area. Over here, there's blue representing the columns area. I'm going to drag it down to rows. And instantly, we get a unique list of dates in our data set. Now, notice, it really did give us a unique list. There are no sales for 1023, and so it's not listing it. Now, I'm going to go up and drag sales down to values. Now, notice sales is a number field. So when I drag it down to values, the default calculation is sum. Next video, we'll see how to change that. But just with a few clicks, I already have the actual totals for each one of the days. Now I want to get rid of row labels, so I go up to Pivot Table Tools Design, over to Layout, Report Layout, drop down, Show in Tabular. There I have the field name. Click in a single cell, right-click, Number Formatting. I'm going to select Currency, Show 0 decimals, click OK. And there I have my daily sales report. Each one of the calculations here is a calculation made with a single condition or criteria. Internally, Pivot Table looked for 1024 in this date column. It found all of the 1024s, added all of these numbers. Notice, just like last video, if I highlight any numbers anywhere in my spreadsheet and look down to the status bar, I can verify that the sum total is correct for 1024. Now let's create our third report. I'm going to click in any one single cell, Insert, Pivot Table. There's my Create Pivot Table. It got it right because we have a single cell in our proper data set. We want existing, location. I'm going to select N23, click OK. Here's our Pivot Table Fields task pane. I'm going to drag the field Sales Rep down to the rows area in our Pivot Table Fields task pane. Instantly, I see a unique list. I still am amazed by that. It literally went through this whole column and picked out one of each. Now for the calculation. Click and drag sales down to values. We don't like row labels, so we come up to Design, Layout, Report Layout, Show in Tabular. We need to add some number formatting. Right-click, Number Formatting. Currency, 0. Later, we'll see how to use different formattings like accounting. But currency, 0 decimal places, click OK. And there's our finished sales rep sales report. Now look at this. We did 1, 2 regional reports, 1, 2 daily sales report, and 2 sales rep sales reports. Now if we compare and contrast either the sum ifs to our pivot table. Well, the sum ifs required that we type out each one of the row area conditions or criteria. It definitely takes longer, and we run the risk of a typing error. Then we had to create our formula and copy it down. With the pivot table, we had, with just a few clicks, the ability to get our unique list and make our calculation with each one of those conditions or criteria. The one drawback to a pivot table, which isn't too much of a drawback, is that if any of this source data changes, we would have to refresh manually the actual pivot table reports. Whereas with formulas, as soon as the data changes, our reports will instantly update. So I'm going to come to the second record in our data set for Northwest, GG, 1020. Northwest total, 1020, GG. Select the cell, and I'm going to type a big number like 5,000. I have not hit Enter, but I want you to notice what happens right there and there as soon as I hit Enter. So you ready? Enter. Instantly that updates. I don't see it updating here. 1020 updated. I don't see it updated here. GG's total totally reflected the change, but not down in the pivot table. Now, it's easy enough to change. You come to the pivot table, right-click, refresh. And just like that, there's the total for Northwest, 1020, and GG. Now, I'm going to Control-Z to undo that, Control-Z to undo that. And now we can see I undid the refresh, and then I undid the actual data change. So we have some ifs and a pivot table feature to create these types of summary reports. Each one has their places. In general, it's faster and easier to use pivot tables on proper data sets to create our summary reports. However, there are definitely reporting situations where you want reports to instantly update, and in that case, you would use formulas. All right, we saw how to use sum ifs to create a summary report, pivot table to create a summary report. We very importantly defined what a proper data set is. And for our first time, we saw how to convert raw data into useful information. And that's our definition of data analysis. All right, if you like this video, be sure to click that thumbs up, comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun, including our next Excel Basics number 5, where we'll do a lot more with pivot tables. All right, we'll see you next video.